Okay. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Leighton, and I'll be your tour guide in today's bonus session in the Engaging All Learners in Secondary Schools. We have planned 3 sessions this year, but people were so excited about the work that we agreed to do one more based on the topic that folks were talking about, which is going to design now. We talked about really important things like assessment, and we talked about equity and diversity, but folks really wanted to have a little bit of a think as we kind of almost move to next year. How are we designing for access and inclusion? So those are the first 3 sessions, and just a note that we'll be done at 4:31, right, Shannon? Shannon and I have to close, so we're like, yes, 4:31. I should just mention that we're doing this work in partnership with the Greater Victoria School District. Thank you, Tammy Renyard, for launching this idea with us. The Rural Education Advisory is a partner in the work, and the Lando Virtual Learning Center is partnering with us, recording this work. We'll send out the link and help us with registration. And we also want to acknowledge the Ministry of Education for supporting us in doing this work and archiving it. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I join you from the traditional and ancestral, unceded, and stolen territory of the Syilx people. I live here in this territory. I get to research and learn and from the land, with the land, from elders and knowledge keepers. And here's just a couple of photos of work I've been able to engage with knowledge keepers and elders. Here we are picking mountain tea in a back road where the tea is the most special, being led by knowledge keeper Anona Campi. And so engaging in this work with local knowledge keepers in the land is my daily work and practice to see what's possible and come to understand ways of knowing that I don't even realize are here that can make such a difference. And I recognize that the Syilx have taken care of these homelands for thousands of years, and it's my obligation now to learn from them, to engage both in stewardship of this place, but also in respectful acts of decolonization and anti-racism every day, both personally and professionally. If you feel so moved, in the chat box, you could mention something that you're doing in your life that's moving towards decolonization or connecting with the land or with your local peoples. This is an invitation and a practice. Decolonization is a personal practice, and wherever we are in the work is where we need to be, and we're all moving forward from where we are. Now you might have thought, so who are today's guests? I'm sure you were thinking that. Today's guests are 3 magnificent humans who I've had the chance to connect with in this grand province of ours. Shelley Moore, I've known, we should count the years, Shelley, but it must be close to 30 because I taught you in my first year of teaching. I think so. And Shelley is an educator with a passion for teaching, for learning, for inclusion, and for equity. And we're just so glad that she's joined us. Shannon Schinkel and I have had a chance to connect around the way and finally in person in Prince George, thanks to Katie Marren. And I've had a chance to visit her classroom. Shannon's doing incredible work in all kinds of ways, but she's going to talk to us about work that she's been doing about building approaches with kids where they get to make explicit how to progress through their learning in ways where they're part of creating the pathway and making visible what that could look like and how they move. So Shannon, we're so glad that you can share that work with us today. I know it's just a taste, everybody. And Katie Marren, who somehow connects all these people together. Katie's District Vice Principal of Indigenous Education in SD57. Shannon's also in SD57. And so Katie and I have had a chance to work together in lots of settings. And she's going to move us forward. And we're going to talk a little bit about some anchor approaches and how she's taking them up. And so it's kind of going to go me to Katie, to Shelley, to Shannon. Then there'll be a recording and we'll all be sipping whatever beverage you'd like at about 4:31 or 5:31 Mountain Time. Is my sound on? Occasionally I'm funnier. All right, so just a couple frameworks that Katie and I wanted to introduce at the beginning of the session is, for us as secondary educators, one of the greatest tensions we experience is multiple groups of kids. We're supposed to design things and make them happen. Sometimes we're even teaching things that aren't our background. But we open up this series and this whole series this year talking about engaging with our kids and planning our curriculum starting from them. that our kids are first and foremost the guides in what we're going to teach. Absolutely, our content's important, but we have to start by saying, who are our learners? What are their strengths? What are their stretches? What are their interests? And based on that, making a few decisions that will then permeate what we're doing, because we're growing with our kids and supporting them to grow from where they are. And then we build the supports into what we're doing based on what we've learned and what we know. A class profile, really it takes into account I like to call it the ecology of the class. I think Shelley may have even quoted me saying that somewhere one time. And so it really says that everybody is everything, every living thing in the ecosystem is important and is interconnected, and we need each other, and to learn and to grow and flourish, we're all connected together. This work is strength-based and learner-centered and learning-centered, which is saying we build from who we are to move forward. And lastly, we do want to say, what are some goals that we have for our class? These goals may not come from our curriculum in the traditional sense. They may come from our core competencies to say, this is something really important that for this group, if we focus on this, they're going to thrive. Building confidence, chances to move, chances to reflect, chances to feel some ownership in what they're doing. As many of you know, I taught many classes of Science 10 one year, and each class of Science 10 had a different goal once I got to know them, because they were different groups of kids. My goodness, the group that had mostly band kids, whoo, I had some work to do in getting those kids chatting. They were just like, sure, Mr. Schneller. Yes, Mr. Schneller. No, what do you think? Yes, Mr. Schneller. And that brings me to passing off to Katie, which is one of the practices that I've developed over the years as a bit of a getting to know you. So I think of assessment as starting from learning from my kids. What are you passionate about? What are you interested in? What are words that describe you? What do you like to do with your family and by yourselves? What are your hopes and your dreams? What are the easiest ways for you to show what you know? What are some goals that you have? When I engage in that kind of work as curriculum design, then kids are informing what I'm doing, but I'm also hearing from them in terms of what they want to know. All right, that's my little intro. I'm going to pass the torch to my good friend, Katie Marren.
Zena Sunzu. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Katie Marren, and I am a district vice principal of Indigenous education here in School District 57. So honored to be here with you all today. I'm coming to you from the unceded ancestral lands of the Clearly people. And like Leighton said, I will be sharing a little bit about class profiles with you. So here, moving from voice to agency is kind of how I see it. We talk a lot about student voice in classrooms, in schools, in our district. And I like to think about moving from voice to agency, which means students become agents in learning and change when they actually see themselves in decisions that are being made. That's how we move from voice to agency. And so the class profile is a great way to make that happen. So again, like Leighton said, some of the ways that we gather that information is we ask students questions. I've used class profiles as a teacher. I've used them as a district resource teacher. When I was a district teacher for inclusive practice, I used it as an administrator when I was had my own staff. I was a vice principal, and I've used it as a district administrator as well for Indigenous education. So I've got kind of 3 levels of examples, and I know that I've got 10 minutes here and Shelley's coming up next. So I'm going to race through this because I know everyone's eager to hear from Shelley. So at Foothills Elementary, I worked with a grade 4 class. The teacher was really struggling, and that was kind of where we started. I was like, let's find out what they want, what they need, what they want to learn more about. They shared so much information, some of their favorite books and stories. You can see, of course, grade 4, Diary of a Wimpy Kid, 22% of them were interested in that. Harry Potter, of course, was right up there. Things we're very good at or interested in. This is quite common. Sports, gymnastics, dance. They were a very active class, and no wonder the teacher had them in desks a lot. That didn't work out so well. The easiest way for me to show what I know, 52% said talk about it. So that's going to inform how we gather information from students and how we assess them. Things we would like to get better at this year, 44 said, math. And of course, it doesn't all add up to 100 because they would say more than one thing. And I really wanted to honor all of the things that they said. So once we gathered the information from the students, and then I themed it and created these visuals. And she actually had these up in her classroom to say, this is who we are. This is what we want to get better at. This is what we're doing this year. This is hilarious. So of course, every single profile I've done with pretty much every group, they always say they're funny. And Leighton just said he was funny at the beginning. It's a thing. It's a thing. Adults, kids, everybody thinks they're funny. So here's the thing is we actually then want to honor that and provide opportunities for kids to be funny. They're going to be funny, whether it's good, bad, or otherwise. So let's actually provide those opportunities. They say that that's who they are. So let's honor that. And we are also kind and caring. What do I need from my teacher? Well, outside learning, 45% of them said that. So it looks like we need to go outside and we're probably going to do some sports. So that's just a super quick example of what I worked on with a teacher at the grade 4 level. And now I'm going to bring it into how I've done it as a vice principal. So when I started at DB Todd, it was a few years ago. I was brand new. And I was new to, somebody is speaking. That's okay. Brand new to the position. I was like, I don't even know where to start. But I did know that I wanted to use the class profile because, again, whatever we do for kids, we also do for adults. Those things work both ways, always. And I also decided to use the spirals of inquiry kind of as a foundation to guide what I was doing with the class profile. So I'll walk you through that quickly. Scanning, what is going on for our learners? So I was a new vice principal at the school. The context of the school had changed. It went from being called DP Snob to DP Todd. The catchment changed. So they had a new variety of learners in the school. They weren't really sure how to respond. They had been short an administrator. They were just stressed out. And they were tired. And I got that information just gathering some street data, right? Having conversations with the teachers. Focus, what will have the biggest impact? What do they need? How do I respond? Well, I knew what I was good at as a district resource teacher and as a classroom teacher. I was like, well, class profiles, I need to figure out what to do. I can't plan unless I actually know my learners. And in this context, now that I'm a vice principal, my classroom is now my staff. So all of the things that I did with my class, I need to do with my staff. And so I did that, developing a hunch. What is leading to this situation? Well, I don't know. I have to actually ask the people. So what I did was, so Shelley is taken from Faye and Leighton's original Who Am I that you saw at the beginning. Shelley adapted it. She used this at a conference that I was at, and I asked permission to be able to adjust some of the questions just for my own context. And she said I could. And so that's what I did. I just adjusted the questions for my audience, of course. Learn, what do we need to learn and how do we learn it? So I asked them. Some of the questions I asked the staff, of course, they were similar. What are some words I could use to describe myself? What are some things I'm good at? What are some ways that I can contribute to this learning community? What will I need to be successful this semester? What is the best way for me to show what I know or show, or how do I learn best, I guess? What do I want to learn more about? And what is a question or attention I have around inclusive education? Because that was attention in that school, I made a question designed around that because I wanted to find that out. And then what is a question or attention I have around student success at DP Todd? So I asked all the staff, and then I focused in on these kind of 4 things. What will I need to be successful this semester? What's the best way for me to show what I know, or how do I learn best? What do I want to learn more about? What is a question or attention I have around inclusive education? And what is a question or attention I have around student success? I themed it all. And at the staff meeting, I'm like, this is who we are. This is what we want to learn more about. We have questions or tensions around. This is what we want to guide our learning for the year. So this happened pretty close to the beginning of the year. Again, the numbers don't add up exactly, but 28% said, I want to learn more about assessment, or I have a tension around assessment. Inclusion, 34%, 6% was classroom management. And then vulnerable students, academically, social emotionally, and first people's principles of learning, they kind of merged them into inclusion. And then when I asked them how they learn best, 39% of them said, I want an expert. I want presentation. That's how I learn best. 14% said, I want to collaborate with my colleagues. 42% said, I need release time. And 5% said, because of course everybody wants release time, but fair enough. If that's how they want to learn, then that's what we have to do. 5% wanted to just go away, learn on their own, and then they could share out. So then what I did was I paired and I grouped them. So the ones who wanted to learn more about assessment, but they learned best from experts. So I found at that time, Tom was doing a webinar series. So I said, Kate, we can sign up for that. At this time, there was a group of people who wanted to learn more about inclusion of vulnerable students, and they wanted to learn from experts. And so I brought them down. I think Leighton and Shelley will remember, I brought a big group down to BC Case at the time. And then those who wanted to learn about assessment but wanted to do it privately, I got them the resources that they needed. The ones who wanted release time and or collaboration, I made a deal with my partners, administrators. We released the teachers. And I said, no problem. I will be in your classroom. You go ahead. I just need to know what your plan is, and I need you to show your learning. And so we can't see very well, but we created this plan that became our learning plan for the year. And it was, here's the visual of what they told me. What do I want to learn more about? How do I learn best? What do I need from my administrators? Collected it. That became my plan for a year as a leader in that school. So I just made sure. And guess what? People can't help but learn when they tell you what they're interested in. They tell you what they want to learn. They tell you how they learn best. And you go, here you go. They can't help but learn. They will go out and do that. Oh, and then there's the fun piece, because we can't leave that piece out, the humanity piece. What is an interesting thing not a lot of people know about me? So I created a Guess Who game that we did and we put it in the staff room, and it got a little silly in some cases, but that's okay. I put all the things that people thought were interesting facts about themselves, and then people would guess who it was. Some answers were obviously wrong because teachers, of course. And then we had a final reveal at a staff meeting of this is actually who it was. It was actually Katie, who, whatever interesting thing about me. Okay, so then third layer, as a district vice principal for Indigenous education, I had a principal reach out to me at the beginning of the year. She's a brand new principal to a little elementary school. And she's like, my staff is really disjointed. They're really struggling with implementing and feeling like they can appropriately support First Peoples principles of learning and some of the local things. They don't really understand what this poster is that's being passed around that we're expected to use. And I was like, okay, well, I have an idea. So let's use the DACAF Holistic Lifelong Learning Model, which is our local learning model, and use that as the foundation for the guiding the class profile or the staff profile, I suppose. So the DACAF Holistic Lifelong Learning Model, it was created by elders, knowledge keepers, local elders, community members, First Nations, our department, designed to support teaching, learning, leading in a more holistic and experiential way. The elders and the knowledge keepers, and I won't go into great detail because I know I'm running out of time. They all agreed upon these values. These were important values that we needed to learn, that we needed to support in our schools and in our classrooms and in our community. And so the 5 values, you can see, this is the front and back of the poster. On the back of the poster, you can see the DACAF ways of knowing and enduring understanding. The 5 are self-identity, respect, truth and honesty, responsibility, and community. And so there's a visual on the front, has a student at the center, parents, families, and elders wrap around, of course. Around that are the 5 values: truth and honesty, respect, self-identity, community. Around that is the language, land, experiential learning protocol, which are ways of embedding these values. Around that is the local seasonal calendar. Around that is water, because water is life and water connects all of us. So we did a class profile, but we actually designed it with the values. So we designed the questions around the values that we want to embed from our local holistic lifelong learning model. We still asked, what are some words I can use to describe myself? I'm good at it, interested in. That's a self-identity. Some ways I can contribute to the learning community. What does respect? So one of the values is respect. Look and sound like to me. What does the ideal school community look and sound like to me? What tension do I have around difficult conversations with peers? And that was designed because it was based on truth and honesty where truth and honesty, one of the values is about telling the truth and living truthfully even when it's hard. So we thought that's a difficult thing to do in schools, is have difficult conversations and sometimes disagree. And then what do I believe is my responsibility as a learner and as a leader? So we took this information, we collated it. Here are some of the interests. Almost 100% of them are interested in the outdoors. Again, funny. Look at this. Over 70% of the adults thought they were funny, caring, and kind. Those are the words they would use to describe themselves. These are the values. What is my responsibility? So they felt that their responsibility is to be open-minded and to continue to learn and use wise practice to ensure wise practice. Their ideal community sounded like collaboration, or sounds like collaboration, friendly, respectful, common vision. Respect sounds and looks like listening, support. And so then we gathered all of that. It was put on posters, and at the following staff meeting, the principal put the posters and the information in front of them and said, okay, now we're going to create this visual of who we are as a community based on the DACF holistic lifelong learning models and what you've told me and what our values are as well. And this is just draft. And this is kind of their representation of who they are as a staff and as a school. They collectively agreed upon these commitments using local Indigenous values as a guide.
Thanks, Katie. We so appreciate you sharing that work and helping us think about the many ways that we can hear from our learners to help create our classrooms. I also loved outside and humor. Hashtag the new secondary school, people. Let's get outside and let's laugh a bit. I'm super excited now to introduce our great friend and colleague here in BC, Shelley Moore. But just before we head on to Shelley, maybe you can either use your icons or the chat box just to say something you appreciated or show your appreciation to Katie. Thanks, Katie. Look at you and your icons, people. Look at you go.
Hi, everybody. Leighton, can you just let me know what my time, like what I'm going till? When I'm going to?
Yes, you go until 4:05.
Okay, great. Okay, hi, everybody. Before I begin, I'd like to just acknowledge that I'm joining you from the traditional, unceded, and ancestral territory of Squamish Nation, specifically Yakwillikam, which is also known today as Bowen Island. And you may notice my background is different because I have a new office on Bowen. And here's the thing about having an office is now I leave the house. I wasn't leaving the house for extended periods of time, but it just has been another reminder of this community that I live in and that I'm so thankful for. I never thought I'd get to live on an island, and now I know what island living is like, and I'll never go back. Just so honored to be from this place, and to just, I'm a parent now, as you guys all know. I have a 1-year-old. A 1-year-old, and just my responsibility now as a parent to teach Meta what I wasn't taught, and also to learn from her, right? Like, she's growing up in a totally different context than I did. And so, within my own reconciliation journey is understanding what my role as a steward and a settler of this land, and as a parent to raise a responsible steward herself, so she can care for this incredible place. So if you haven't had a chance to acknowledge the place that you're joining from, please do so in the chat box. I'd love to see. All right, so just as a reminder, I post all the things that I show on my website. So if you want to come back to anything I show you, so I have it on, if you go to blogsmore.com, everything's organized by date. There's a button that says handouts, and so that is there for you. I don't really have the executive functioning skills to organize my website, so you can guarantee it'll be there for at least 5 years. Excellent. Okay, so the class review, we've all done it. It changed my life. It changed my practice as a support teacher in a secondary school. It helped me realize that my role was less about supporting students in classrooms and more about supporting teachers to support students in classrooms. And it was almost like, I hate the word caseload, but like, I had to shift from thinking I have a caseload of students to I have a caseload of teachers, kind of like what Katie said about her staff. Like her staff is her new classroom. And so the class review was a really pivotal strategy for me, as both a classroom teacher and a support teacher, to start really moving some conversations away from triage conversations and complaining conversations to some like, let's actually do some like proactive conversations and planning to prevent some wildfires. And so I got the class review and I used it many, many, many years, but there was one spot that I was stuck. And that was the decisions part. And we would and I have done similar things that Katie has done with the data and things, but what often happened is that we would do it and then it would kind of get put to the side, and we wouldn't look at it again. And it bothered me because like we really took a lot from the process. And so for me, I'm just like, I feel like we need more attention to the decisions because that's where the action is. And I felt like that we kind of like didn't know what to do. So we kind of skipped over it, or the decisions weren't deep enough for the impact that I wanted. And so in my journey, I was just like, how do we kind of extend this decision piece to give a little bit more attention to some of because to me, what a decision for a class-wide is, or what are ways that we can reduce barriers. And as soon as I kind of thought about that, I'm like, okay, well, then what are the barriers in classrooms? And there are many, but there are two for sure that every classroom and school are navigating. You could be the most inclusive educator in the world, and every classroom will have these barriers just simply because the system itself isn't designed to be inclusive or equitable. And so I'm like, well, there they are. There are the barriers. And so what frameworks do we know that we can commit to, or strategies and practices that we know that we can commit to that will help us almost to provide a scaffold for decisions? And then the other decision that I realized became apparent was, well, what core competencies are we hitting? So basically, I adapted the class review to give extra attention to decisions because that's where I felt like it was wavering off. And so this is an adapted version of the class review. The other thing that I wanted to pull in was because I was learning a lot about like the idea of identity and how do we not just respond to interests, strengths, and stretches, but actually to the identities, both that we see represented, but also that students are declaring to be part of that kind of just like culturally responsive piece. And so this is something that I've been trying. You'll notice needs aren't here, and I'm going to tell you where they went because they didn't disappear, but I'm going to tell you where they went. And so this is an adapted version, and how it's kind of set up is the first row is about the kids, as much from them as possible, their voices. But then the second one was about the teacher, because as a support teacher, I'm like, I also need to know how my classroom teachers that I'm supporting are diverse. This isn't just about telling them what to do, which was a long lesson for me to learn, but I got there eventually. But to be responsive to teachers. And the first decision was really almost a decision about how are we going to work together. And in a lot of times I'll bring in the support menu that Leighton has presented before, which is like, as a support teacher, what are some ways that we can work together in this class? And that also gives choice for teachers to engage in collaboration processes. Like it can't look exactly the same for everyone because teachers are also diverse. And then the other decisions, I have them set up kind of as, we can meet these goals that we have for our class by reducing barriers in the classroom, talking about barriers as two big barriers, which are barriers to learning and barriers to equity. They exist in every single classroom. But then I realized that there's a lot of questions about what a barrier is. So you're going to need your chat box for this. So on the screen right now, you see a person who uses a wheelchair and they're trying to get to the top of the hill. Tell me in the chat box, is the problem the stairs or is the problem the person? I can't wait to see what you say. The stairs. I mean, it's obvious. Of course it's the stairs because the person can't do anything about that. That's who they are. Okay. So like in the world, in the concrete world, We get this. I don't think I've ever had an argument about what the problem is here. But as soon as we get into intellectual worlds and emotional worlds and behavioral worlds and all of these worlds that are a little bit more conceptual, all of a sudden, and even like all of our resources go into the kid, go into the person as the problem, not the stairs. And so when I think of decisions, I think, what can we do to the stairs rather than what can we do to the person? But I mean, our entire special education model is about there's something wrong with the person because we have such a hard time shifting our thinking from concrete to abstract. And so I'm thinking, okay, well, we can use this class review to help us identify barriers, but also make decisions to reduce them. You with me? Okay. So if we're going to look at these two barriers that we know exist, in every classroom, because the system was not designed to be inclusive or equitable. So I mean, and these barriers exist at every level of education. We could talk about this provincially, district-based, school-based, classroom-based. And so for a class review process, we are targeting classroom level barriers because those are things we can control tomorrow. Okay. We may not be able to change the provincial funding model tomorrow, but at least if we know where we're heading, we know what to advocate for. But these are things we can do in our classroom today, because there's a lot of things we don't have control over. This is something we do have control over. Now, the good news about, because I'm going to go through both of these, but let's start with learning. The good news about learning is changing the stairs to learning is so researched. It is so researched because, my friends, one of the most impactful decisions we can make to change the stairs of learning is universal design. This is universal design for learning. It's changing the stairs. Actually, it's not even changing the stairs. It's just like adding another path to the stairs because some people love the stairs. It's just simply saying, okay, the stairs are a barrier. What's another option? Okay. And so this is kind of debunking a myth that UDL is special education. It isn't. It actually is. It's a stair. It's reducing barriers. It's not about fixing people. And so I'm gonna tell you what I love about UDL, and then I'm gonna tell you what I can't stand about UDL, and maybe you'll find yourself in the middle. So UDL, so well researched, and it's about this idea of multiple pathways, so that we're not just relying on the stairs. We get that. It's based in how we learn, not how disability, not to fix this, something to do with disabilities, have to do with learning, how all of us learn. And in order for us to learn, 3 parts of our brain have to be highlighted, okay? They have to be activated. It's nicely color coded. So the first one is we have to be engaged. We have to care. We have to, now for some kids, compliance is enough. Do this because I told you. That's becoming less and less effective. And so if compliance is the stairs, we have to add another path, because the more paths you have, the more kids are going to engage. Yes, this is not an adaptation. This is simply adding a path. So they have to be engaged. We know that. The second one is representation. This is new information coming in and the information processing, getting processed. So it's very simple. The more ways that information goes in and the more paths that they can process it, the more kids are going to get up the hill. Not an adaptation, just another path. And then they have to express it. They have to share what they've learned. That's the goal. So if the only way to share is taking the stairs, some kids aren't going to share. So the more ways, the more pathways we have, the more kids are going to share. It's very simple. It's very simple. That's the part I love. Here's the part I hate. When I was learning how to do this, I was like, okay, I get it. Multiple pathways. So what do I do? How do I do it? How do I engage kids in multiple ways? How do I represent information in multiple ways? So I was like, okay, no problem. There's a website. I'm going to go to the website. I'm going to actually model for you exactly what I did when I tried to research this. Okay. So I went to, let me share my screen here. I went to the UDL website, cast.org. Y'all can go there. It's at Harvard. It is Harvard, fancy Harvard Research Institute. Okay, ready? So this is what you do. Cast.org. There it is. Look, it comes up. Ooh, it's so pretty. Look at it. Look at it. until learning has no limits. Oh, that'd be a great t-shirt. And I'm scrolling and I'm like, cool, what is it? I'm looking and I'm looking. I'm like, oh, introduction. Perfect. I'm going to click on it. I'm like, oh, this looks so good. This looks really, really good. Guidelines, tips. $1,000 American. I'm like, who has that? Nobody. So I'm like, there's got to be something for free on here. There's got to be. And I'm looking and I'm looking. I'm like, World Vision, Lindsay Jones, I don't care. What is it? What do I do? I'm so frustrated. By the time I get here, I've lost people. People are like, UDL's not for me. I tried it. It doesn't work. And then you go down here to this tiny, tiny, tiny little button. Look how small it is. It's like in the footnotes, this tiny, tiny little button. And you click on it and you're like, okay, now this looks okay. I'm feeling better. I mean, maybe it should be more central, this beautiful chart, but whatever. I'm not going to point out the irony of UDL not being designed properly. And so I'm looking at this beautiful, beautiful chart and I'm like, okay, this makes sense. So here's the color codes. Oh, these must be different ways to engage kids. Okay, what is this? Access, build, internalize? No idea. And so I'm just going to look and I'll be like, okay, so let's take a look. So engaging, recruiting interest, sustaining effort. That sounds weird. Let's go with heightened salience of goals and objectives. What? Who is this written for? You know who this is written for? Habitas. And so you know what people do? They're like, UDL's not for me. I don't understand. It is so jargony, people. The barrier to UDL is that it is not written for teachers. So then I get really frustrated by this. And I'm on a 7-hour air flight. And I'm like, I'm so frustrated because the idea of UDL is so good. It makes so much sense. No, Leighton, don't edit this. You know what? David Rose needs to hear the truth. And I'm just thinking to myself, this is so unaccessible. So I take matters into my own hands because I'm a Leo. My 7-hour flight, I even learned how to color match for this. And I'm going to give this to you. But I went through every UDL strategy and I tried to make it into like language that makes sense for my brain. And I noticed that other people also seem to like this. So for example, what does heightened salience mean? Heightened salience means that we're clearly communicating the learning goals. So why don't they just say that? I have no idea. And then I was like, oh, is that why it's called saline solution? Because it's clear. Connections. So all I'm saying is, so when I actually went through this, it actually started to make sense. So how do we help kids engage? Number one, we help them to be interested by giving them choice. We help them to stay motivated by making it clear why they're doing what they're doing. We help them cope with learning when learning gets hard. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. Now, the other thing that the Orthodox UDLers won't tell you is that you don't have to do every single UDL outcome or UDL strategy to be considered a UDLer. You can just pick one. And so here's the other thing I noticed is that as an educator making a decision for your class, you can kind of look at this almost as a reflection to say, what am I already doing? Because everyone's already doing something, right? What is something that I want to dig in more? What's something that will really impact my learners right now? How about we pick one? Let's pick one for this unit. Let's pick one for this term. I did this with one school and every team picked one to focus on for the year. And they all brought examples at every staff meeting for the rest of the year. It totally changed the whole structure because teachers also need choice too, right? And so I have one for all of them. So here's your presenting information and helping them understand it. Like pre-teaching important vocabulary. I'm sure most of you are doing that already, but may not even realize that it's a UDL strategy. So like I go through this and I'm like, you know what, people are doing a lot of these things already, which makes it less scary. It makes it less overwhelming, but it also gives ideas for things that you could also try. Doing this as a team, pick one. It doesn't matter what you pick because it will reduce barriers for everyone. But here's the part you need to know, my secondary friends. Nothing on these checklists will compromise the integrity of your evaluation. It is so important that you know that, because you're going to look at some of these and say, that looks like an adaptation. There's no such thing as adaptations anymore. This is universal practice. You are allowed to have choice in text. You are allowed to have choice in examples. You are allowed to have choice in evidence. Not everyone has to do the exact same thing in the exact same way for it to count. So if the only thing you look at this is as permission granting, use it, because especially in British Columbia, we have the most flexible curriculum and assessment frameworks. Nothing on here is, you don't have to worry about any one of these affecting your evaluation, because they're tier 1 universal practices that you can do tomorrow. Yes, Leighton, are you having an aneurysm over there?
Only around
feeling okay?
editing. Only around editing.
No, you know what? No, this is important. People need to hear the truth. Okay. So I have an example here. This is an English 11, grade 11 English. And what was interesting with this class was I had put identity as, I call them dimensions of kids. And the teacher was like, I don't want to say what their identities are. I can put what I see represented, but that might not match how they identify. And so she actually divided it up in terms of, what do they say their interests are? What do they say their identities are? And what do I see? Because we can still respond to kids, whether they are not identify or not. And that's actually an indicator that we need to represent even more, because if they're not identifying, it's probably because they don't feel safe identifying. And so ways that we can respond to that is by having them be represented in the curriculum. And so just it nods to that. You see your strengths and stretches. And then what the teacher really wanted, what they had a goal to work on was to get them better at writing, expressing their ideas, connecting learning to their lives, right? Those are kind of big like life goals. And then in terms of things that she wanted to try, and this was like direct kind of like support she was looking for from her support teacher, was support for assistive technology to try and increase written output, organizing scribing support for students that wasn't adults or wasn't people, and incorporate multiple ways of expression, because she loved her essays. And we talked about how that could be a barrier to some kids. And so what are different ways that we can allow students to show their learning without being so like task oriented? And then she picked one UDL strategy from each: engagement, representation, and expression. So the ones that she was targeting for the year, helping students set and choose learning goals to build their confidence and take ownership, sharing new information. So she wanted to share new information in different formats. And expression, teaching students to organize their evidence and choose their best evidence of learning instead of relying on failed attempts of learning. And so this made a huge difference in terms of not just making decisions, but following through with decisions. And I just looked at my time and I'm so sad. But that's okay, because, Pacific Rim School District 70, it's not posted yet, but when I finish this, I'll post it under the date for today. Okay. And I'll say like British Columbia. The last thing I want to tell you about is barriers to equity. Okay, now it's really important for me that you know that I can't tell you what to do unless I am in the community that I'm talking about. So, I mean, I can talk about being queer, I can talk about mental health, I can talk about being a woman. I cannot talk about indigeneity, right? Like, so I mean, like, it's really important that we're talking about reducing barriers to equity, that we're seeking out people from those communities and listening to them. All I'm showing you is that here's a place to hold it once you make your commitment. And so what I have gathered is just some resources that have been recommended to me from people in these communities that have offered and given me permission to share. But these are strategies set up specifically for students who have been marginalized and from the system of schooling, who've been them and their families have been disenfranchised from the system in some way or another. And so this is changing the stairs specifically for them, because we know that the system is just in itself racist, right? We know that the system just in itself is ableist. This isn't about a personal decision. This is, like, I saw a meme the other day that said, looking at systemic racism isn't looking for the sharks in the water, it's looking at the water. And this is what we're doing. We're looking at the water because it's the water that's the problem, not the sharks. And so for these kids have historically not been successful, not because of who they are, but because of the water. And so these are commitments, and this directly connects to reconciliation efforts and commitments that we are making to change the water in our classrooms. And so I have a whole bunch of resources. We have some, and I love Joe Corona says it's more than just a poster on the wall, right? Like this is about how are we embedding these principles into everything we do. And so this particular grade 11 teacher, she went through some of the resources and picked 3 that she was going to commit to in her classroom with her kids for the rest of the year. And hers was using real life experiences to connect school to students' lives, arrange the classroom to facilitate student discussion and collaboration. She realized that even just sitting in rows is a very colonial practice that implies that only the teacher is a teacher, as opposed to facilitating conversation and teaching opportunities for kids to learn from and with each other. Like that is an equity-oriented practice. And then she actually asked the class, like, what principle of learning do you really want to reflect on and learn more about? And the kids picked reflect on how learning involves patience and time. And that became a theme through the whole term. And they got the local Indigenous elder to come in and talk about this and say, what does this mean? And this is like a senior level English class. And there's ways of, I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you to commit to something, right? And so this became a decision that they made that went beyond just getting to know who the kids are, but making decisions to say, what are we going to do that reflect these kids that will make a difference for everybody. The last one, I'm not going to talk too much about it, is just the last decision, which is pulling in. This is a great place to pull in core competencies, get the kids involved in the process to say, like, what competency does this class want to work on? Do you want to work on individually based on strengths and stretches and needs? We've done a really great job, I think, provincially reflecting on core competencies, but we also still have to teach them. And so this is a way that we can explicitly target core competencies, say, this is what we're going to work on together. What do you think we need to work on? Because even within one competency, there's so many ways that you can make that personal, but it's that's what we have. That's what we're going to target and teach to the class. I'm going to put all of these things on my website for you. There's a button that says handouts right on it. And if you go down to today's date, it'll be highlighted in like 15 minutes, and it'll take you to all of these resources and the equity-oriented practices resources list that have been gifted and gathered with and for me. And here do we have time for breakout group, Leighton? No? Okay. So I'm going to wrap that up. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Type to each other one useful idea so far today in the chat box, and I'm going to hand it over to
Shannon.
I'm so lucky to be able to work with Shannon. I've worked with her in a couple different capacities. As a district resource teacher, we started working together, and then last year I was the vice principal at her school. And the one thing that I know about Shannon is that, and that I love so much about her, is that she never stops learning. She positions herself as a learner alongside students. And she's always adding to what she knows. And so it is absolutely my honor to introduce her and have her work with you here today. She'll be sharing her proficiency sequences, which are competency-based assessments.
All right. Thank you so much, Katie, for that introduction. And thank you, Leighton, for having me. I'm coming to you from the traditional ancestral unceded lands of the Lheidli T'enneh. And I feel quite honored to be able to deliver this presentation on these lands. This is my introduction to proficiency sequences. So this slide, everyone should resonate with, right? Because we've all been there. We're juggling so much. And since the redesigned curriculum, and since we have evolved as learners and realizing that things aren't working for all of our learners, I have had to change my assessment practices to meet the needs of my learners. And to start with, we have a whole bunch of things thrown at us. So I have found that actually through the generation of what are called proficiency sequences, I'm able to meet the needs of more learners And it ties in so beautifully to what the session is called, which is about access and engagement. So it works really well. So I'm basically going to share my story, right? So this is how we're going to design for access and engagement on the teacher level here. So, we have to start with our curriculum. We have to actually examine the fact that we've got the two pieces that are distinct from each other. In the traditional mindset, the most important thing was the content. But if we actually look at Bloom's taxonomy, we can see that there are these wonderful opportunities to show understanding and application and analysis and evaluation and creation, which is the curricular competencies unpacked. And so it means that this old school thinking that we need to keep teaching all of the content and kids need to just regurgitate that through tests or in only one way shouldn't be, I think, the way we focus, okay? It's actually looking at the curricular competencies. Now, this doesn't mean that we're not going to use the content. The content is supremely important because we have to have content to actually do the curricular competencies with. So I always like to use the idea of the framing of a house. We have the content is the knowledge piece, and the rest of the curricular competencies become the house. And I think that's a great visual as we prioritize our curricular competencies over our content. So just like many of you, I'm sure on here with the redesigned curriculum, we got this proficiency scale. What the heck do we do with it, right? So like many of you, I started ranging my tasks to be aligned to different curricular competencies. But I noticed some problems with the way in which I was doing this. So these are kind of like the steps in my process and how I actually got to the sequences. So the first problem I noticed is I was designing that was really task specific. And that's not serving the needs of my learners, especially given the fact that even for myself, I was going to have to change all of the criteria from emerging to extending every time I changed a flipping task. And then that meant that the kids only knew how well they did in one specific task, but they actually couldn't see the flow and the process of their learning with regards to the curricular competencies. Like you can see in this one here, you just look at the highlighted words. You don't have to read this whole proficiency scale. Drafting a story, drafting a story, drafting a story. That means I'm making all of my students show their learning in just one way. And I'm going to only give them the criteria for how to draft the story. The other problem with creating proficiency scales that are task specific is that I was using deficit-based language. And if I wanted my students to feel like they were winning as opposed to losing as they were working through a scale, I need to make sure I change that language. So instead of highlighting, okay, you're developing because your draft is lacking in something, I wanted them to feel like they were winning as they're actually working through some kind of a scale or sequence, okay? So my next shift then was, okay, that's it. I'm not gonna worry about task specific. I'm gonna do a deep dive into the curricular competencies themselves. And I'm gonna create criteria so that kids know exactly what is meant to do. And then as they work through different learning opportunities, they're going to see how they evolve. Sounds great. Sounds awesome. So I went to the single point rubric. Target down the middle, beautiful grows and glows on either side. I took my extending criteria that I had in mind, slapped it down the middle. What could go wrong, right? I want all of my learners to achieve that goal. I want them all to get to extending. But I'll tell you what happened. So I took criteria, what I wanted kids to be able to do, for example, for this writing and design, which I picked because I think we can all kind of resonate with that because we all use writing and design processes, even in all of our subject areas. But it was great in the fact that I had glows and grows. It was great in the fact that then kids could see what they needed to do next, but there were also some real struggles with this. I found that even though I was supplying feedback and it seemed positive and it also seemed constructive, kids really didn't know how close they actually were to the target. I could give them through 3 learning opportunities, lots of grows and glows. And then by the time I get to report card time, they're still at emerging. or they might be at developing. And they're like, hold on, that's the only place I'm at, but you've given me, you know, lots of feedback and I showed improvement. You sure did. So I ended up reflecting on this and realizing, okay, I have to get rid of the fact of just focusing on the extending criteria and actually unpack it right from the very beginning. What does it mean for when a student is at emerging? What is it going to actually look like, right? What is it then going to look like at developing, at proficient, at extending? And this is starting to look much better. It meant that I was actually taking the curricular competencies and I was laying it all out on the table so that kids knew exactly what they needed to do when they were using writing and design processes. And then I thought, this is going to be a lot more simple. This is going to be a lot simpler if I simply turn it on its side and use some other kinds of powerful language. So this is, in essence, now what is the proficiency sequence. So they can actually see what it takes to get from one point to the next. What was really great about this is that it aligned with the proficiency scale, but in a really different way. And it became really powerful for kids to see it in this way. Instead of it being, okay, you need to hit just the criteria sitting there under proficient, instead it became this pathway. So every single student starts at that criteria under emerging, at should do. And then they work through the developing, the can do, the could do, the try to do, which I love that language. I stole it totally from Shelley because I love that in what she uses in her learning maps. So it became this notion: when a student gets through the criteria of should do, can do, and could do, ultimately then that's what gets them to proficient. It's not that they're lacking anything, but they have these little goals, these baby steps all along the way. And every single student actually starts at the exact same point and works through as far as they can. So the next thing is that it was task neutral. So that means that the language that I'm using in this sequence is designed for any number of texts. See, here's the thing, folks. If we actually do a deep dive into these curricular competencies, we'll see that the way maybe we've rocked it old school by, you know, beginning with the binder of lessons and what's in the textbook first doesn't make a lot of sense when we actually unpack what the curricular competency is asking students to be able to do. That opens up so many different opportunities for kids to actually show their learning in so many different ways, rather than always the same way, like, you know, the 5-paragraph essay, which I know is an important structural thing, but you know what? There are other ways that kids can show their learning. So a student could have a goal of, I'm going to go from should do to could do. I want to write a short story about chickens because I love chickens. So I'm going to write a story about chickens. Or maybe they want to make a children's book because of something else that's going on in their life. This is the access and this is the engagement piece. Let them have an idea. This is kind of stems back from what I'm hearing from Katie and from Shelley, where when we find out what kids' interests are, why not let them write about this? Why not let them actually do a deep dive into things that they actually want to learn about? You know, I have actors in my class. Why not let them produce a play? You know, like it says, you're writing a text, let them write a variety of texts. Strengths-based language is the next piece. That's really, really important about this. Starting with at the top of the page, instead of highlighting the emerging, developing, proficient, and extending, first, this is what I should do. This is what I can do, could do, try to do. And there's no deficit-based language. Each of these rows is about what I'm doing well. And it's not like as if it's a free pass. When they hit each level, they still have to do it in appropriate ways, right? I'm going to talk about how the teaching piece comes into this. So they actually have to be able to do this. And as they work through the sequence, there are upticks in sophistication. It takes a little bit more finesse to learn how to make modest revisions as opposed to small revisions. So it's not like as if they're just ticking off a series of boxes and they're all, at the same level. Each level, it's just getting a little bit more sophisticated. So this is hugely transparent for kids to see, because they can actually see that the pathway is right there in front of them. They know the steps that they need to take. I love the idea of making sure that all the criteria is clear and it's not elitist. It's not this exclusive club for certain kids. It's about creating the opportunity for students that they can get as far as they can on this proficiency sequence. I teach every single level exclusively because I know what expectations are. I'm not going to wait until a student is at a high level to then teach them the next level. I'm going to make this clear to every single student. This is the practice piece. This is the ungraded practice that they're actually going to see what it is that they need to be able to do. So they know, you know what, I can do this. The kid who views themselves as, I'm a failure at writing, I'm a failure at school, I can't do this, can see that they can do it, because I'm teaching them exactly what they need to do and how to get there. And they're working together to learn about how to do this as well. So this is my favorite quote. Students can hit any target when it stands still. That means that we've got this curricular competency unpacked. We're going to go through a variety of learning opportunities, one after another, and they're going to set goals and they're going to see where they're at. But you know what? It's staying put. They know that, all right, if I got to can do and I'm developing now, when the next learning opportunity is, you know what? My goal is to get to could do and get to proficient, because I know that's my next level up. And as a teacher, when students get to a certain level, I can actually put kids into groups and have them work on specialty skills that they need to do just to level up. It's this, I want to create this aura of success, not an aura of failure. The other thing is, I want to make sure they realize that even the furthest level on the proficiency sequence is not another building the next block over, right? This idea that kids get to proficient and those are the only students who get to see what it's like to get to extending, I don't think that that's doing kids any justice. They need to realize that all the levels are right there in the same building and they're completely accessible. If they reach that goal, this will be my next goal, and then this will be my next goal. It's so optimistic. It's so beautiful to actually hear that. I walk around with my students there. I walk around and see what they're working on. I'm like, okay, how did you do on the last writing assignment? Oh, I made it to can do. And that got me to developing. Then what's your goal? How are you going to be able to do this? What's your plan? What can I do to support you and get you to that goal? It's super powerful. In my grade book then looks really different, right? This is a standards-based grade book, but here's the thing. Both of these students are in the same class, and this is an English 10 class, right? This is an English 10 class. And instead of suggesting that they all have to do the exact same learning opportunities, I'm going to look at the students as individuals. What's going on with them? And how many pieces of learning do they need to actually show me that they are proficient? For a student that is having difficulties or works more slowly or has been away from school due to illness or is just struggling with school and has family problems and any of those kinds of things, you know what? I'm going to meet them where they're at. And I'm going to say, you know what is the kind of learning you want to be able to show me? So this is a big shift, I know, when it comes to assessment. But for both of these students, when I assess how they write, both of these students are proficient. One student did 6 pieces, the other did 3. There is still adequate evidence of learning. It's not about the number of learning opportunities, but it is about the quality of the learning opportunities. And that, friends, is the equity piece. It's sometimes less works just as well as more. Then we're just going to end with cyclical. So I think cyclical is incredibly important. I am, of course, not an expert in Indigenous ways of knowing and learning, but one of the most profound things I learned from Dr. Dustin Louis when he presented last year to my school it just made me really think about proficiency sequences, because a lot of these curricular competencies, they look exactly the same from one grade level to the next, depending on the course. So why do we need to be rehashing or redesigning all of the different criteria from one grade level to the next? Why can't they use the exact same criteria and incorporate different content each time and show their learning? So this is where the content piece comes in, right? When kids get to try to do, and they're not done with new content and new ideas, they're just going to learn more, and they're going to embed more into themselves and in their own learning. So it goes around and around, which I think is incredibly important, that they get more opportunities to show their learning and show what they know and can do. Now, I'm just looking at my class. Oh, I actually have time. Okay, so I've been working with teachers for the last couple of years to actually build these sequences in other subject areas, because folks, this works for every single subject area when you unpack the curricular competencies. My first piece of advice is, don't decide that you're going to make proficiency sequences for every single curricular competency. Choose one, and then work on assessing a handful of those curricular competencies. You know, we need to teach the entire curriculum, but we can specifically and authentically assess just a handful of curricular competencies, so kids know exactly what they're working on. So this was a proficiency sequence I made with an Art 8 teacher. And again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time, talking about what's been embedded in each of these. You'll be able to look at it on the replay, and you can pause and have a look at it. Okay, here's a Science 10 curricular competency, right? And you can see that the language, again, up at the top is, we also sometimes we have to rejig the language of the curricular competencies, because some of them are quite complex. So we try to make them a little bit simpler. Here's one for ADST 8. This is a fantastic one, because how beautiful is this? That ADST is like, there's so many different courses that belong to this. If all the ADST teachers came up with the same criteria and used that, so that they know that this is the goals and this is what they need to do to actually test and gather feedback and make changes depending on what the ADST course is. Math 8. I'm always asked about, how does this work for math? Because math seems to be this whole other planet, with all their content, and it's just, it feels so overwhelming, I know, for kids. But, grab a couple of curricular competencies, like using logic and patterns to solve puzzles and play games. My good friend, Erin Wilson, and I built this in my school a couple of years ago, and she uses it all the time. And the kids understand this criteria. She takes them into the library. She has the sequence up on the projector, and the kids can see where they are. And then, folks, the other beautiful piece is, the kids, because they understand the criteria, they can self-assess. And they're using language like, today I got to can do, tomorrow I'm going to work on could do, and this is my plan, and this is how I'm going to do it. And they actually, there's this student agency. I have my own goal, and this is what I'm going to do. And then the teacher can come along, and they can actually throw in, little problems and issues, and get the kids to actually purposefully and beautifully struggle as they're working through this particular competency. And it was just awesome. So if you want more information on proficiency sequence building, I wrote more at length on the last couple of blogs, well, a couple of blogs in the last couple of months, and you can use the link there. And please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm on Twitter. You are all BC teachers. If you are on Facebook, I encourage you to look for my Facebook group called Beyond Report Cards, where I'm always sharing blogs and other resources and things like that that I think will help, and it's designed to support you. And thank you very much for listening to my work with proficiency sequences.
Thank you, Shannon. Very exciting. And I know for those of us who've been playing with assessment for a while, it helps us really think about strength-based language, building something over time. And, I've come to spending time with elders and knowledge keepers and Indigenous colleagues, slower, deeper over time in meaningful ways is a practice to embrace decolonization instead of more and more and more. So I appreciate that as a support for me in my own ongoing, not just teaching work, but life work too. Folks, as we close, I invite you to just think, is there something you could take away from today? Is there something that you could hang on to from any part of today that you can, mull over, consider, discuss with yourself, your cat? I don't know about you, but my family members are just so excited to hear me talk more about education. It's okay, they're used to it. What's something you can take away from today?
Thanks, everyone. Just appreciate so much you, Leighton, for being in this journey with us. This was our first year for secondary as a webinar series after school. We know it's always tricky, and we appreciate that folks can sometimes get back to the videos. We're hoping to continue on, Leighton, next year with year 2 for secondary. This work matters so much. Especially when we look at students through that lens of reconnection and engagement, and as Katie talked about, agency. So I think it's super important, as I think Brad, you said, that we're not alone. I think networking across the province as we continue to lean into the work that matters most for students is so important. So super grateful for you being here. Watch for messages coming out about 2.0 next year. I love to have some of our guests back who have been here this year to help us go deeper in the conversation. We have big work to do to support our students. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone. We so appreciate all the work you're doing. And in secondary, transformation is a bigger job because we feel those pressures in all kinds of ways. But when we, as Shannon was saying, when we lean into what we believe in, we can do this work together. And I'm so glad that we're connecting across the province, because when we also see what other folks are doing, it gives us ideas for what we can do in our contexts. Love you in a professional way. I mean it. 6 more weeks, everybody. You're doing great work, and we can do a lot of good work in 6 weeks with our teenagers. Take good care, everybody.